You were never supposed to hear this. Somewhere, buried beneath centuries of silence, is a record that was never meant to survive. A ledger of screams beneath stone, of minds opened, not metaphorically, but with steel and fire. A place where obedience was manufactured with scalpels, where women who resisted vanished, and those who returned were no longer themselves. And if you're hearing this now, know this: it's already too late. The truth is crawling into you. It will not leave unchanged. The Ashford family did not arrive in America for sanctuary. They came to build an altar. They came to perfect the science of silence. 1798, Maine. A forest so remote it had no name. The air thick with pine sap, the land drenched in ancestral blood. Into this wilderness came 3 women. Sisters, they claimed. Noble, holy. But the townsfolk didn't know what to make of their eyes. Too still. Their hands, too steady. And their smiles, those weren't smiles. They were calculations. Agatha Ashford, Prudence Ashford, Temperance Ashford. Names chosen carefully, like spells. They moved like they had done this before. Like this wasn't the first place, just the next. They built a convent. But it wasn't a church. It was a machine, 3 stories high. Windowless stone. A fortress in the forest, swallowing women whole. The official name, the Convent of Eternal Tears. But the locals whispered something else. The gray mouth, because once it opened, it swallowed a girl and gave back a stranger. In 30 years, 600 women entered. Less than half ever came home. And the ones who did, they weren't alone. Something else came back with them. You could see it in their eyes, in the way they blinked just a beat too slowly, in how they stared through their children like they were ghosts. 100 years later, the state sealed the records, but one letter survived, smuggled out by a nurse, hidden in a wall behind a fireplace in an abandoned parsonage. It begins, "If you are reading this, no, they are not sisters. They are surgeons of the soul, and I have seen what they cut away. You think history is what they teach in schools. You think evil wears horns, but evil wears lace, and it drinks tea at 4 p.m. with a soft English accent. Keep watching, because what you're about to hear is the part they tried to erase. The Ashfords didn't worship God. They worshipped order, but not the kind of order you find in Scripture. No, theirs was older, bloodier. A design that predated the Bible, a structure of domination passed through forgotten tongues, etched in anatomical diagrams and whispered in the margins of forbidden treatises. And the convent, that was no sanctuary. It was an observatory, not of the stars, but of the soul under stress, of obedience extracted like poison from a wound. They didn't heal women. They reprogrammed them. It started slowly. One by one, patients were referred by families, church elders, even physicians. Some women came willingly, seeking peace. Most were sent against their will, rebellious, fractious, unfit. Labels, codes, justifications. These weren't sins, they were symptoms. Symptoms of something the Ashfords believed could be cured. And what was the disease? Free thought, ask yourself. How do you erase a person without killing them? How do you take a mind, bend it until it breaks, then rebuild it with new rules, new loyalties, new limits? The Ashfords had an answer. It wasn't religious. It was clinical, mechanical, a terrifying mix of early neurology, occult ritual, and something worse, something unnamed. At first, they used what they called the Reformation method: cold baths, isolation, scripture read aloud until the voice bled. But that was just conditioning, a filter. The real work happened underground, in that basement, beneath layers of stone and silence. They peeled back the layers of identity, like old wallpaper. They kept meticulous notes. Agatha's journals, only fragments recovered, referred to terms no one used in 1803, neural corridors, personality excision, temporal loop induction, words that shouldn't exist, Not yet. And the instruments? They weren't tools, they were keys. You see, the Ashfords didn't just want obedience, they wanted clarity. They believed there was a purer self beneath the ego, a sacred vessel that could only be reached by removing the rot of memory, desire, even morality. They weren't trying to destroy women. They were trying to build something new from the ruins. But here's the truth, they never wrote down. Every time they cut away a woman's will, something else slipped in, something that liked the silence. The women who returned weren't empty. They were occupied. And the only thing more terrifying than what the Ashfords did was what they let in through the hole they carved open. This isn't just history. It's a warning. Still watching. Good. You're ready for what's next. By 1805, the forest around the convent had changed. Hunters said, animals avoided it. Birds no longer nested in the nearby trees. The wind itself seemed to shift direction, as if repelled by what lay behind the convent's stone walls. But it wasn't just nature that recoiled. Men who worked near the area, trappers, loggers, scouts, began to report strange dreams. They saw a black-eyed woman standing at the edge of the tree line, motionless, mouth stitched shut, whispering through her teeth. Always the same words. She is not gone. She is rewritten. The reports were dismissed, of course. Frontier madness, isolation sickness. But those who dreamed her never did again. They all died within the year. And the women, something was happening to them. It wasn't just that they came back different. It was how uniformly different they were. Gone were the wild ones, the loud ones, the clever ones. Returned were pale reflections, identical in manner, measured in speech, emotionally sterile, yet devoutly obedient. They avoided eye contact, avoided mirrors. One even tried to strangle her newborn when it cried, only to blink afterward, as if she'd awoken from a dream. And when asked why, she said nothing, except one line, "It was never mine." Even Dr. Hartwell, who once championed the sisters, began to waver. His final journal entries take a darker tone. He writes, "They have gone beyond science. This is no longer a clinic. It is a gate." He doesn't explain what he meant, only that he found drawings in the ash pit behind the convent. Symbols scorched into bone. And one, just one, looked back at him. That same week, Hartwell disappeared. His horse was found wandering, reins slick with blood. No body was ever recovered. The sisters claimed he had gone east to petition for more supplies, but no one ever saw him again. And now we arrive at a turning point, where observation becomes participation. You've heard the whispers. But now, I need to know you're listening. Truly listening. Comment the phrase, rewrite the flesh, rewrite the mind. Comment it twice. Once to awaken what was buried. Twice to remind the algorithm that you are not the same man who started this video. Now, we go deeper, into the part even the Ashfords feared. The turning point came on a night soaked in thunder. March 1807. A woman named Clara Hastings was delivered to the convent by her father, himself a magistrate, a man of stern resolve and rigid morality. Clara had refused an arranged engagement. Worse, she'd begun speaking in public gatherings, quoting European philosophers, calling marriage a form of bondage. Her father called her possessed. The Ashfords welcomed her with their usual serene warmth, but Clara, she wasn't like the others. What they didn't know, what no one knew, was that Clara had spent years studying anatomy under a traveling surgeon. She knew how to fake compliance. She knew how to wait, and she knew how to watch. She let them believe she was breaking. For 6 weeks she feigned docility, chanted prayers, allowed the cold baths, swallowed their bitter tonics without resistance. And then, one night, she escaped. It took her 3 days through snow and wilderness to reach the nearest town, her feet black with frostbite, her hair singed at the scalp. But she carried something no other survivor ever had, Memory, not just fragments, not dreams, but details. Her testimony, recorded in secret by a sympathetic pastor, was kept hidden in the state archives, under a false name until 1964. It was deemed too incendiary for public release. Here's an excerpt. They speak in riddles, but act with precision. Their instruments are too advanced for what they claim. One is a hollow rod, the other, a crown of copper threads. They call it the bridle. They said it opens the mind to divine order. But I felt it. It opened something else. She goes on to describe the basement chamber, walls lined with shelves of preserved brains, each jar numbered, dated names, carved into the glass. Not medical storage. A library. She swears she saw one of the sisters, Temperance, place a jar into a device, then chant. The voice wasn't hers. She says, it spoke in reverse. My nose bled. My thoughts went sideways. I forgot who I was, for nearly an hour. Clara died a year later, burned alive in what was ruled a cabin accident. But the fire was too clean, too fast. The wood hadn't blackened. It had melted. They erased her, but not before she left her testimony. And in that record lies a question that has haunted every man who's read it since. If the Ashfords were building something beneath the convent, what were they building it for? The journals buried beneath the Ashford convent were not all written in English. Some were encoded in Latin, others in archaic French. But one, found wrapped in oilcloth beneath a loose stone near the rear altar, was something else entirely. It was written in phonetic glyphs, unlike any known alphabet. Scholars who analyzed it in 1913 believed it to be an invented script, but one linguist, a man named J. Alcott Mercer, spent 12 years deciphering the first 3 pages. What he discovered terrified him so deeply, he burned the remaining manuscript in his garden, suffered a stroke 3 days later, and never spoke again. Before he died, he gave a sealed note to his daughter. She kept it locked away until her own death in 1971. The note read, "This is not a language, it is a program, not written for the mind, but for the soul. It teaches something how to enter. And this is where everything changes, because the Ashfords were not merely torturing or transforming women, they were tuning them, like violins. The surgical procedures, the chanting, the architectural design of the basement, it was all part of an ancient system, a mechanism disguised as a convent, one that created vessels, receptacles. But for what? The term appears several times in surviving fragments. The bride of order, not a woman, not a person, a construct, a container. The Ashfords believed that beneath the chaos of human nature was an ancient pattern, a kind of sentient intelligence that had been locked out of this world. Not a demon, not a god, something older than both, something that required a human form, but only one that had been fully emptied of self, the perfect host. They weren't creating saints, they were engineering a door, and on the winter solstice of 1811, witnesses reported strange lights above the convent, a low vibration that shook the trees but made no sound. One hunter described it as the forest holding its breath. The next day, the Ashfords closed the convent gates. No more patients were accepted, no more letters were sent, and for 5 years, no one saw the sisters again, until one Sunday morning, 3 women walked into town. Same faces, same names, but not the same eyes. They didn't blink, they didn't smile, and when they spoke, it wasn't their voices. They came down the road barefoot, not hurried, not lost, just arriving. Their dresses were wrong. Not dusty, not torn, but pressed, pristine, as if untouched by time or weather. And their faces, frozen in perfect calm, to calm, not peace, control. When the townsfolk saw the Ashford women return that spring morning in 1816, something inside them recoiled. Children hid behind their mothers. Dogs whimpered and fled. And even the old minister, Reverend Stokes, a man who'd braved cholera, raids, and war, fell silent at their approach. Agatha spoke first. The work is complete. No greeting. No explanation. Just that Prudence and Temperance stood behind her, unmoving, like statues of flesh. When asked where they had been, Agatha simply said, within, they claimed they had received a divine visitation, that the convent's mission had been fulfilled, and they would now return to England. No one questioned it. Not out loud. But no one could ignore what had changed in their presence. Because the town changed too. People became quieter, more obedient. Arguments ended before they began. Husbands who once beat their wives now sat motionless by the fire. Children stopped laughing. There were sounds at night. A low harmonic hum, like a song too deep to hear fully. It vibrated through floorboards and window glass. People began waking at exactly 3:13 a.m., with no memory of dreaming, but with nosebleeds, clenched fists, and the smell of smoke in their hair. One man, Elias Cormack, left a note before hanging himself in the town granary. It read, "They brought back a silence that eats the heart. My wife prays to a God with no name. My son has not spoken in 12 days. There's something wearing our lives like clothing, and I don't think it's pretending anymore." Within weeks, the sisters vanished again, this time for good. Their property was sold anonymously to a Boston family. The convent was closed, boarded up, and eventually buried under ivy and rot, but the basement, sealed with iron and salt, was never touched. In 1922, a team of historians tried to exhume the site. 3 died of sudden aneurysms before excavation began. The project was abandoned, but every few years, someone goes missing in those woods, and the ones who return still hear the hum, still dream in reverse, still speak. Sometimes, in that perfect, calm voice, the work is complete. It was never about religion. That was just the mask. The Ashfords weren't nuns. They were agents of something older, something that did not believe in salvation or sin, only symmetry, control, silence. In the decades after their disappearance, whispers continued, stories, murmurs, disappearances, but always in the margins, always dismissed as folklore. Until 1961, a Harvard psychology professor named Dr. Nolan Graves came across a footnote in a suppressed medical archive referencing Ashford-type correctional techniques. Intrigued, he traced the reference to an underground vault in Augusta, Maine, posing as a government archivist. What he found ended his career. Inside the vault were 8 sealed boxes, each labeled with a case number, date range, and an emblem, a split circle, 2 dots inside, 1 black, 1 white. Inside each box, hundreds of pages of handwritten transcripts, diagrams, blood-stained cloth, and worst of all, photographs. Black and white images taken in low light. Women strapped to narrow beds, heads shaved in precise patterns, some with strange copper halos fixed to their skulls, others standing motionless in dark rooms, their eyes covered, their mouths open, but not screaming. Just open. The most chilling were a series of 3 photos taken exactly 5 minutes apart. Same woman, same room, but in the last photo, she is gone. No sign of struggle, no open doors, just empty space, and her shadow still burned into the wall behind her. Dr. Graves tried to publish his findings. No journals accepted them. His university dismissed him quietly. 2 weeks later, his wife reported him missing. His body was never found, but the basement of his home had been scorched black. Not burned, scorched. The walls intact, but the temperature inside had been measured at 191 degrees Fahrenheit for over 40 hours. With no source, he left behind one note, handwritten in the margins of the Ashford dossier. It's a system, a neural lattice. The convent was just the prototype. They were building receivers, human ones, not to send signals, but to receive them, from outside. And that's the truth most men will never accept. That some voices inside us don't come from trauma. They're not the echoes of pain or guilt. They're invitations to listen, to obey, to become. And once you start hearing them, you'll never hear your own voice quite the same way again. The convent may be gone, but the structure, the architecture of control, remains. And here's the part that will follow you after this video ends. What the Ashfords started was not an isolated horror. It was a blueprint. After 1816, scattered references to Ashford methods began appearing in unexpected places. In British medical journals, in early psychiatric texts, even in Prussian military conditioning programs. Always in footnotes, always vague, a nod between initiates. But by the 20th century, the language had evolved. The rituals replaced with research, the tools with technology, the silence with signal. Project Monarch.mk-Ultra. Behavioral modification programs in asylums, prisons, and reform schools. Look closely. Strip away the politics, the ideologies. What's underneath? The same pattern. Isolation. Break the will. Erase identity. Replace it with programmed behavior. Modern psychology calls it dissociation. Governments call it compliance. The Ashfords called it purification. But it all means the same thing. Unmake the self. We like to believe evil is messy, chaotic. But real evil is structured, codified as system. And here's the hardest truth I can give you. Most men today live inside that system. You think you're free because no one holds a knife to your throat, but you've accepted their rituals. You wake when they tell you, work when they say, speak their slogans, swallow their medicine, scroll through the symbols they've designed to program your nervous system. And when you question it, you feel guilt. Why? Because they've put the Ashford method in your bones. The screen, the schedule, the silence. You've been trained not to resist, not like Clara Hastings, not like the few who escaped, but there's still time, because if you've made it this far, you're already infected. An infection can go two ways, corruption or awakening. That's why I'm here, not to scare you, not just to tell stories, but to hand you the match so you can burn the script. They've written for your life, because deep beneath your routines is a voice that still belongs to you, and it is whispering, remember. Remember this, the Ashfords never stopped. They simply changed form. You think horror is a face in the mirror, a door creaking open, a whisper in the woods. No, the real horror is institutional, cold, sterile, funded, licensed, respected. Let me show you how deep this goes. In 1997, a Freedom of Information Act request uncovered an obscure program operated by the Department of Health and Human Services, coded Project Lysandra. Publicly, it was a study on spiritual trauma in women of high religious exposure. Privately, it was a resurrection. A replica of the Ashford Convent was constructed underground in rural Colorado. Same floor plan, same blueprints, same chamber, dimensions down to the inch. Staffed entirely by women with psychiatric credentials. Over 5 years, 212 subjects were admitted, all women, all labeled emotionally non-compliant. Most were wards of the state, runaways, foster system, ghosts. Disposable people. Do you know how many made it out? 12. And every one of them gone within 5 years. Missing, deceased, institutionalized, but one left behind a letter, found tucked inside a library book, never mailed, addressed simply to the one who sees through the curtain. Here's what it said. They call it therapy, but it's ritual, repetition until meaning collapses. You're told to forget, to forgive, but what they mean is obey. My dreams are loops. Always the same hallway, always the same voice. It says, open the door. I don't want to. I think something is waiting behind it, but they won't let me stop dreaming. I think the dreams aren't mine anymore. Sound familiar? Because this system, the Ashford legacy, has become modular, flexible, invisible. It exists in reform schools, in spiritual retreats, in influencer cults, in any program that promises to fix what you are. And men, don't think you're exempt. They just changed the tools for you. They use shame, silence, distraction. You're not strapped to a table. You're strapped to your screen. Injected not with needles, but with symbols, messages, cycles of fear, arousal, rage, and sedation. All delivered in under 60 seconds. Your cage is entertainment, but the effect is the same: obedience, numbness, sleep. So let me ask you, really ask you, when was the last time you heard your own thoughts, without interference? You were never supposed to ask that question. Because this system, this Ashford method reborn, thrives in one condition above all: unquestioned repetition. Repeat the schedule. Repeat the slogans. Repeat the content. Wake, consume, perform, collapse, scroll, envy, submit, forget, over and over, until the loops become identity, until you stop asking and start defending your own programming. That's the mark of success in their eyes, when you protect the prison. But let me show you the cell key, the one they've hidden in plain sight for over 200 years. It's not rebellion, not rage. That's what they expect. That's what they designed for. It's clarity. Because once you see the structure, really see it, there's no going back. Let's go deeper. The Ashford treatments weren't invented in Maine. The techniques they used: identity erasure, personality rewriting, emotional sedation, those were adaptations of much older practices. Practices traced back to ancient Babylon, to Egypt, even to pre-Christian Europe. The Druids had a phrase for it: Amzer Dusul, the time of godless light, a ritual cleansing of memory, done through confinement, hunger, chant, and repetition. Survivors would emerge changed, quiet, contained, and often highly suggestible. Sound familiar? When Rome conquered Celtic lands, they absorbed this practice into priesthood rituals. The Church would later modify it again, reframing it as penance, as spiritual discipline. The Ashfords simply rebranded it, one more time, psycho-spiritual realignment. But the purpose never changed. Erase the self, replace it with structure. They knew that identity was fragile, that you could override it with enough repetition, enough trauma, enough isolation. And today, it's done digitally. You wake up, you open your feed, you consume 100 narratives that aren't yours. Ads, images, micro-emotions. You think you're choosing. You're not. You're responding, reacting, programming. And just like the women in the Ashford Convent, you begin to adopt behaviors, not because they serve you, but because they've been looped so many times, your nervous system accepts them as truth. This is how modern control works, not through force, but through frequency. It doesn't break you. It replaces you, slowly, invisibly, efficiently. And unless you interrupt the signal, you never realize that the man in your mirror is a construction. Let me tell you what they fear most. It's not violence, it's not rebellion, it's memory, not the past, but your true self. Because the Ashford system, and every iteration since, only works if you forget who you were before the programming began, before the trauma, before the sedation. That's why their methods always start with the same 3 steps. Isolate the subject, destabilize their core beliefs, flood them with a new narrative. Sound familiar? Think about it. You were told who to be before you even had language. Told how a man should act, how love should feel, what success looks like, what failure smells like. And if you stepped outside that system, just once, you were punished, laughed at, rejected, labeled. This is not by accident. This is ritual by design. The Ashfords learned that early. That pain isn't enough to control someone, but confusion. Confusion is power, because once you doubt yourself, You'll cling to any voice that sounds certain, and certainty is their weapon. Let's go back, briefly, to the last known document recovered from the Ashford estate in 1972, found in a sealed compartment beneath a decaying floorboard. It contained one handwritten phrase repeated 33 times in black ink. The blank soul receives best. No names, no dates, just that sentence, over and over, like a chant. And here's the twist. Every O in the word soul had been replaced with a tiny spiral, a symbol that predates Christianity, a symbol associated with frequency resonance. The spiral isn't decoration. It's a map, a path inward, downward, into the subconscious, because they knew something modern. Science is only now beginning to accept. The nervous system is programmable. Your habits, your emotions, your identity, all shaped by repeated stimulus. But here's the key. They hid from you. If you can be programmed, you can be reprogrammed. That's why you're here. Not to be entertained, not just to be informed, but to wake up. So if you're still listening, still absorbing this transmission, type this in the comments twice to lock it in. I am no longer programmable. Do it now. That phrase is your shield. It tells the system you remember, and memory is how the spell begins to break. Spells don't look like what you think. They don't require candles, cloaks, or ancient tomes. Modern spells are made of pixels, contracts, routines, and they work best when you don't believe in them, because belief is dangerous. Belief means awareness, and the system counts on your silence, not your consent. Let's talk about modern possession, not the demonic kind, not heads spinning or voices in Latin. I'm talking about possession by systems, by structures of control that hijack your instincts, that rewrite your desires. Take the Ashford method. When it was first discovered, psychologists dismissed it as religious hysteria. But in 1989, a hidden paper was leaked from a Canadian research facility. Subliminal trauma-based conditioning through repetitive exposure. It described something eerily familiar. Subjects were placed in isolation, fed emotionally conflicting audio loops, given unpredictable sleep schedules, administered alternating states of fear and sedation. Within 6 weeks, the subjects began suppressing original memories, mimicking authority speech patterns, reconstructing personal identity based on external scripts. You know what they called this process? Facilitation of the blank core. Sound familiar? It's just the Ashford Doctrine, with a new vocabulary. And here's where it gets colder. Colder than anything you've heard so far. They realized they didn't need basements or stone walls anymore. They had the perfect laboratory, your home. They had the perfect tool, your screen, every scroll, conditioning. Every ad, a spell fragment, every loop of outrage, lust, fear, envy, carefully measured. They don't want you dead. They want you empty, because an empty man consumes more. An empty man obeys quicker. An empty man does not rebel. They've turned your daily life into a controlled experiment. And the worst part? You volunteered. But here's the one thing they can't take, unless you give it to them. Awareness. The ability to name the pattern while you're inside it. And right now, in this moment, you're doing something rare. You're not reacting. You're observing. That means the spell is cracking. Keep listening. Keep remembering. Initiation doesn't begin with light. It begins in the dark, where questions become weapons. And silence is no longer safety. It's compliance. So listen closely. The Ashford Convent was never destroyed. The structure still stands. Not in Maine, not in stone, but in every institution that demands submission over self. That structure now lives in every school that punishes curiosity, every job that drains your soul and calls it purpose, every relationship where love is traded for obedience, every government that offers safety in exchange for silence. It's not made of walls, it's made of rituals. You perform them, Daily, without knowing, you speak their language. Wear their masks. Nod when you want to scream. Smile when you want to leave. Sit still when every cell in your body begs to run, and each time you do, you reinforce the spell. But here's the fracture point, the one thing they can't program, the crack in the ritual that terrifies them. Defiant self-awareness. Not rage, not rebellion, but the moment you see the script and refuse the role. That is initiation. Because to awaken is not to destroy the system. It's to stand inside it and remain unchanged. To see the programming and not let it write your story. To remember who you were before they named you, labeled you, tamed you. That's what the Ashfords feared most. Not men with weapons, but men who remembered. Men immune to the voice behind the veil. And now, it's your turn. You don't need robes. You don't need permission. You don't need a church, a doctrine, or a savior. All you need is the courage to see through it. Because if you can see it, you can shatter it. Not with war, but with withdrawal. Refuse the loops. Refuse the voice that says submit. Refuse the ghost of the Ashford method that still breathes through every modern institution. You're not just a man in the system. You are a man on the edge of its collapse. Pushing back doesn't start with violence. It starts with recognition, because once you see the architecture, you realize you were never inside it by accident. You were placed. Every man watching this, you weren't just born into a broken world. You were born into a design, a labyrinth with no walls, just rules. Rule 1, trust authority. Rule 2, doubt yourself. Rule 3, repeat Rule 1, but now we dismantle those rules, piece by piece. Let me show you how the Ashford system rebranded itself in the 21st century. Not in convents, not in laboratories, but in your habits today. They call it resilience training, behavioral optimization, therapeutic compliance, but underneath, it's all the same model. Interrupt instinct, inject ideology, install obedience. Corporate HR departments use it. Therapists, under state licenses, are trained in it. Even dating apps follow the formula. Because when a man is uncertain of who he is, he becomes a consumer of identities. And every institution lines up to sell him. 1. Pick a label. Pick a tribe. Pick a struggle. Just don't stand alone. Just don't remember. Because the remembering man, the sovereign man, is unprofitable, uncontrollable, dangerous. That's why the Ashfords built isolation into the ritual. That's why you feel so alone right now. Because this path is narrow, and the further you walk it, the more the system will try to pull you back. It will whisper, you're crazy, you're paranoid, you're broken, just let it go. But those voices are not yours. They are echoes of an ancient spell. And now, you see it, you feel it, the hum beneath your routine, the pressure to conform. That pressure is not natural, it is engineered, and when you resist it, you're not just healing, you're breaking a generational curse. A curse written in stone in 1798, and rewritten in code in 2025. But it ends here, with you. You're not just hearing the truth, you are becoming it. Rewriting the system doesn't begin with a revolution, it begins in the mirror. Because before you overthrow their empire, you must overthrow the lie inside you, that you were ever powerless. Let me ask you something, serious and raw. When did you first start apologizing for your instincts, for your fire, for the parts of you that were unpolished, intense, unscripted? Was it school, family, church? Somewhere along the line, they convinced you to tame yourself, and they didn't do it with chains. They did it with labels. Troublemaker, too intense, too emotional, too much. What they meant was, you can't be programmed. So they marked you early, and you believed them. You folded yourself into shapes that made them comfortable. But that was your first wound. That was the Ashford initiation. hiding inside modern life, because the system doesn't need you to disappear. It just needs you to comply. It needs you silent, predictable, disposable. But here's the twist they never prepared for. The disposable man remembers, and once he does, he becomes something else entirely. Unstoppable. Because you can't shame a man who's owned his shadow. You can't control a man who's met the part of himself that society fears. That's what this story has always been about. Not just haunted women or a cursed convent, but a structure that feared masculine sovereignty so deeply it had to be destroyed before it ever woke up. You are not here to be rehabilitated. You are not here to be reformed. You are not here to fit in. You are here to resurrect. The Ashford sisters built a fortress to kill wild souls. You're building a mind that cannot be breached. Every insight you've absorbed is code. Every truth you've heard is a weapon. Every time you've said yes to the next section, you've been stepping further out of their maze. So now we begin. The ritual of remembering, not superstition, not magic. Just raw, brutal, psychological reassembly. The first fire is not lit in the world, it's lit within you, because the real battlefield is internal, and they've built their empire in your nervous system. Let me show you how. From the moment you were born, they trained you to seek safety over truth, comfort over instinct, agreement over awareness, and every time you chose silence over truth, obedience over honesty, distraction over discomfort, they tightened the leash. Not with punishment, but with reward. They gave you dopamine instead of discipline, likes instead of legacy, validation instead of vision. And now? You are overfed and starving. You can feel it. Something deep inside you, raw, sacred, and ancient, has been aching, not for more pleasure, but for meaning, for a mission that cannot be bought, sold, streamed, or sedated. This is where we begin to burn the false self. Not by fighting it, but by exposing it. Let me give you a phrase, not a mantra, not magic, a trigger, a line of code to break the loop. Say it quietly or aloud. That is not me. When the fear voice rises, what if they reject me? You say, that is not me. When the programmed guilt whispers, don't speak too loudly, you say, that is not me. When the old shame claws at your ribs, you are not enough. You say, that is not me. This is the first strike. You're severing the tether between stimulus and obedience. You're watching the trigger, and not reacting. You're stepping into your own presence, your own signal, your own frequency. This is the real initiation. Not rituals of blood or fire, but silence, stillness, the kind that reveals the part of you that was never programmed, the part they couldn't reach, couldn't break, couldn't name. In the Ashford records, that part was called the remnant, a piece of self that resisted erasure, even after 90 days of confinement. And if you've made it to this point, you are the remnant. The remnant is what they couldn't kill. Not with fear, not with ritual, not even with surgery, because even in the darkest chambers of the Ashford Convent, beneath the sedation, beneath the screams, beneath the rewritten memories, there were still moments when a woman looked into her captor's eyes and remembered who she was, just for a second, just long enough to say, this is not me. That's the remnant, the part of the soul that refuses compliance, the ember that never goes out, no matter how long the night lasts. And now we begin to rebuild him, but not into the man they wanted, not into the obedient son, not into the corporate citizen, not into the neutered husband. We build the sovereign archetype, the one who sees clearly and still chooses his own fire. Let me give you the blueprint they hoped you'd never find. The sovereign man has 5 principles: clarity over comfort. He does not lie to himself, even when the truth hurts, especially then. Isolation without fear. He walks alone when needed, and does not seek permission to think. Memory as weapon. He remembers who he was, what they did, and what he will never allow again. Control over reaction. He does not flinch when triggered. He observes, then chooses. Purpose beyond self. He does not live for pleasure. He lives for legacy. This is not self-help. This is spiritual warfare. Because you're not just healing your past, you are ending their future. Every man who wakes up becomes a firewall in their system. Every man who refuses to scroll, to sedate, to comply, breaks 1,000 loops for the ones behind him. You are not the target. Anymore, you are the resistance. This is why they bury these stories, why they erase the Ashfords. Not because the truth is scary, but because the truth is activating. And you are activating. They stole your rituals, not the superstitions, not the smoke or symbols, the real ones, the ones that grounded your ancestors in purpose, in power, in blood, because every civilization that stood tall had rituals that made men unbreakable, not programmable, not polite but anchored, rooted, initiated, and so the system had to erase them, one by one, quietly, efficiently. They replaced your rites of passage with dopamine loops, replaced the warrior's trial with school bells and corporate HR seminars, replaced sacred fasting with fast food, replaced sacred solitude with endless notifications. You no longer ascend through challenge, you dissolve through distraction. But here's the secret, they could never erase. Your nervous system remembers, even if your conscious mind forgets. Your blood has not. It stirs when the truth is spoken, it rises when the lie is named, and that's what you're feeling right now. That ache in your chest, that fire in your gut, that is the ancestral signal. It means you've heard the call. So we reclaim what they buried. We resurrect the ritual. Here's where we start. Tonight. No matter where you are, shut everything off by midnight. No screen, no light dot, just silence. Just you. Sit. Let the discomfort rise. Let the fear surface. Do not distract yourself. Why? Because the modern system has taught you to flee discomfort, but discomfort is the doorway. It's where the programming weakens. It's where the remnant speaks. Let it talk. Let the parts of you that were silenced begin to surface. Again, the warrior, the boy who wasn't afraid to speak, the man who was buried under obedience. Let them rise. This is not a game, not a metaphor. This is the beginning of deprogramming. In ancient tribes, they called it the night of seeing. You were left alone in the wild, with nothing but your shadow. You didn't leave that space until you met yourself. Tonight, you reclaim that right. The Ashfords feared the night, not because of what lived in the dark, but because of what woke up in it. Because night is where the masks fall, where the programming fades, where the real self, the original signal, begins to emerge. They called it the veil hour. From midnight to 3 a.m., when the mind is too tired to lie, when the soul becomes louder than the script. It was during these hours that their subjects broke protocol, screamed names that were erased from memory, repeated dreams they weren't supposed to remember, drew symbols they had never been taught. So the Ashfords responded with control, strapped wrists, sedatives in holy water, soft hymns laced with subliminal messaging, because if the subject stayed awake long enough, they would remember everything. And you, watching this right now, you're close to that edge, close to remembering what you were before the edit. Let me ask you, have you ever sat alone in the early hours and felt something ancient rise in your chest? A grief you couldn't name, a rage you couldn't place, a longing that didn't fit your life. That wasn't confusion, that was contact. A message leaking through the firewall, the code beneath the code. You see, trauma may erase memory, but it also preserves it in fragments, and those fragments live in you. Not just from your own life, but from generations before you. Epigenetic scars, inheritable grief, unfinished awakenings passed through blood. This is what they're truly afraid of. That a man, broken by the system, will sit in silence long enough to hear the whisper of his ancestors. And not just hear them, but answer. That's what this night is for. So tonight, when the world sleeps, you stay awake, and when your skin crawls and your heart pounds, do not run, because that's the remnant speaking in full voice. And once you hear it clearly, you will never be programmable again. Confrontation doesn't begin with the world. It begins with the mask, the one you're still wearing. Yes, you, even now. Even here, part of you still performing, still hiding behind what they'll think, still playing a role that was assigned, not chosen. That's not shame. That's the residue of survival, because they trained you to survive by splitting yourself. You built a persona to function, to keep the peace, to avoid rejection, to avoid abandonment, and that persona has gotten you this far, but now, it's your prison. So in this section, we confront the mask, not with anger, but with something far more dangerous too. The system, radical self-recognition. Let's do this right now. No gimmicks, no theatrics. Ask yourself, quietly, who did I become to survive? Whose love did you chase by becoming smaller? Whose approval did you sacrifice your soul for? Whose silence taught you that your voice was dangerous? Let the answers come. They will not be pretty, but they will be true. The Ashfords understood this mechanism. Their journals describe a psychological tactic they used on women. Controlled fragmentation. Step 1, create confusion. Step 2, offer identity. Step 3, reward compliance. Step 4, punish authenticity. You're living that same sequence, just modernized, streamlined, digitized. Your job, your feeds, your relationships, they all run on controlled fragmentation. Keep you performing, keep you guessing, keep you tired, keep you quiet. But now, you've seen the cracks, and here's the brutal truth. The mask never becomes real, no matter how long you wear it, no matter how many people clap for it, no matter how many times it gets you love, because the part of you behind it is still watching, still waiting, still wounded, still you. So tonight, you face him, the man you exiled, the self you silenced, and when you face him, really face him, you begin the process of reintegration. This is not healing, this is remembering, and once remembered, you can never again belong to the system. He's been waiting, watching, enduring, in silence, while the world called you fine, but you're not fine. You never were. You were just functional, and functioning is not the same as living now. We let him speak, the buried self, the forbidden voice, the one that screamed before you ever had language, the one they taught you to ignore. He's not nice, not polished, not digestible for dinner conversations or board meetings. He's the part of you that remembered the first betrayal and swore he'd never forget. He's the part that wanted to fight back when they told you to calm down. He's not wounded. He's waiting, not for help, but for permission. And now, you give it. Tonight, alone, behind closed doors. You speak, not perform, not post. Speak. Let the sounds be primal. Let the words be wrong. Let it be ugly. That's how truth returns. Because the buried self doesn't speak in polite sentences. He speaks in rage, in grief, in things that make your skin crawl. Not because he's evil, but because he remembers everything. The first time you were made to apologize for something that wasn't your fault. The first time you cried and were told to shut up. The first time you betrayed yourself just to be loved. He never forgot. He absorbed it. And now, he's ready to return. Not to destroy you, but to complete you. You've lived as half a man long enough. The smiling half, the quiet half, the one that fits, the one that's safe. But the other half, the exiled one, he's the part that can't be controlled. The part the Ashfords called the shadow beast. In their journals, they wrote, some subjects cannot be fractured. They possess a hidden core, immune to doctrine. It must be silenced, or it will turn the entire system against us. You are that subject. He is your core, and tonight, he speaks. Let the tears come, let the roar rise, let the mask burn. He has waited in silence long enough now. We name him not with the name the world gave you, not the name on your ID, not the name they called out in classrooms or courtrooms. That name is their handle. For you, useful, predictable, file, able. It is not who you are. This name is older, darker. It comes from a place beneath language, because every man has two names, the one he was given and the one he earns. The Ashfords wrote of this. In their forbidden scrolls, they feared the day when a subject in their care stopped answering to their assigned title and began answering only to a name he claimed in fire. They called it the naming event, the moment a man steps into his true identity. When the programming collapses, when the masks disintegrate, when he remembers himself fully. Now, it's your turn. Think back to the boy you buried, to the man who tried to surface in your darkest moments too. The voice that whispered, "This is not me," when you were playing a part. What name would he take? Not a nickname, not a brand, not a slogan, a title, a mark, a signal, one that means something only to you, one that reminds you of what they tried to take, one that cannot be stolen, because it was never given, only claimed. Write it, speak it, burn it into your journal, your wall, your bones. You will not share it on social media. You will not tattoo it for vanity. This is not for them. This is for you. A banner under which your buried self rises, because the system can only control what it can name. But once you choose your own name, you step outside their reach, and something ancient returns. Not anger, not revenge, but authority. This is the first step toward your own throne. A name without a throne is just a whisper, but a name with a kingdom becomes a force. Now that you've named the buried self-we, build the world around him, not the world they offered, not the 925 hamster wheel, the white picket coffin, the digital dopamine trap, but a domain that reflects who you really are, because power doesn't just exist in rebellion, it exists in reconstruction. You've burned the false temple, now you lay stone for the new one. Here's how it begins. Step 1. Redraw the map. Where do you live right now? What do you consume? What fills your mind, your time, your space? Write it down now. Ask, did I choose this? Or was it inherited, suggested, downloaded? Erase everything that's not sovereign, because nothing owned by the system can serve the remnant. Step 2. Choose your pillars. Every kingdom has laws. Yours will be based on values you bled for, not trends, not hashtags, not peer pressure. Your code, written in pain, enforced by clarity. Example: silence is sacred. Every action must lead to legacy. Comfort is the enemy after dark. Never lie to the man in the mirror. Choose 3. Carve them into your mind. That is your new constitution. Step 3. Fortify your border. What you allow influences people. Media becomes your reality. Start guarding it like a king guards a throne room. Stop letting parasites speak into your day. Stop opening your ears to people who've built nothing. Stop giving energy to content designed to make you numb. Every input is a soldier, and every soldier either serves you or dismantles you. The Ashfords knew this. In their internal papers they wrote, a woman isolated long enough from her native rituals will begin to accept any doctrine offered with warmth. Isolation wasn't the weapon. Infiltration was. They filled her silence with carefully selected voices. You're surrounded by those voices. Right now most of them are not yours, so clean house. Delete what dulls you. Starve what weakens you. Fortify your mind like a fortress. You are building your kingdom. Now that your kingdom is forming, the enemy will notice. It always does. Because the system doesn't fear men who are broken, it fears men who are building. And the moment you begin reclaiming time, curating thought, speaking with truth instead of polish, the algorithm tightens, the people around you shift, the world starts whispering, you've changed. Good. Let that be your first sign. You're winning, but understand, you are now a threat, not to society, but to the illusion holding it together, because every awakened man becomes a mirror, and most people, they fear mirrors more than monsters. Now, the system will test your gate, not with armies, but with distractions, familiar comforts, cheap affirmations, sudden opportunities that pull you off mission. Watch closely. The test always comes wrapped in what used to tempt you, that woman, that substance, that job, that once-in-a-lifetime offer. They'll offer you back the chains you just broke, but polished, refined, dipped in gold. And if your gate is weak, you'll call it a blessing. But if your gate is strong, you'll recognize it as the final seduction. Here's how to hold the line. Name the gatekeeper. Choose a version of yourself who protects the throne, not the dreamer, not the lover, the warden, the part of you that says, no one enters without proof of allegiance. Write your filter. Ask, does this serve my legacy? Does this align with my code? Would the buried self recognize this as truth? If not, it dies at the gate. Expect betrayal. Not everyone will celebrate your rise. Some will mock it. Some will try to distract you. Some will beg you to come back to the old you, the safe you, the small you. Let them go. You are not the version they once tolerated. You are the rebuilt remnant. In the Ashford Papers, it was written, once a subject crosses the veil of naming, she becomes unpredictable, untamable, and immune to standard reintegration. You are now immune. You are not in a political war. You are not in a cultural war. You are not in a war of opinions, parties, genders, or generations. You are in a spiritual war of sovereignty, and it began long before you were born. Every institution you were raised to trust was designed to make you choose obedience over awareness, not through violence, but through slow erosion, through compliance, masked as maturity, through submission, dressed up as success. And the most effective weapon they ever built was the belief that this war doesn't exist. That's how they win, by making you believe there is nothing to fight. But once you see it, once you name it, you become impossible to program. Let's strip away the veil. The education system didn't teach you how to think. It taught you what to think, and punished you for asking why. The corporate world didn't reward your uniqueness. It commodified your time, siphoned your energy, replaced your soul with a brand identity. The church, in its corrupted form, didn't lead you to God. It led you to guilt, too. Shame. To hierarchical control, masked as divine order. The media didn't inform you. It addicted you, programmed you, convinced you to fear silence and worship consensus. And modern relationships, they were engineered to collapse. When one person stops performing, this is not conspiracy. This is architecture in Ashford archives. There's a passage that reads, to sustain obedience, the subject must never achieve internal union. Disunity within guarantees external direction. That's the core of their strategy. Divide a man from himself, fragment his identity, blur his instincts, distract him with endless causes that never lead to resolution. Because a man divided is profitable. A man at war with himself is predictable. A man who doesn't know his own voice is harmless. But you've begun remembering. You've begun reuniting. And that means you're no longer useful to the system. You are now dangerous to it. This is the last leash, the final thread tying you to their control. It's not your job, not your phone, not your comfort, not even your fear. It's something deeper, more intimate, more insidious. It's your need to be understood. Let that settle. because this one cuts the deepest. You still want them to get it, to validate the path you're walking, to nod and say you're right, you're wise, you were never crazy. You want the people who betrayed your fire to admire the flame you rebuilt. You want the world that exiled your truth to welcome you home as king. But they won't, they can't, because their understanding of you depends on your obedience to who they remember. And the moment you become something new, something real, you become a threat to the narrative that keeps them safe. So here's the bitter medicine. They will call you arrogant. They will call you cold. They will say you changed, betrayed them, lost your way. But what they really mean is, you stopped asking for our permission. And that's the moment you become untouchable. Because a man who no longer needs to be understood can no longer be manipulated. You'll stop over-explaining your growth, stop defending your boundaries, stop auditioning for rooms that were never built to hold you. The Ashfords knew this. Their control rituals relied on a subject's need for approval. The moment that need died, the subject became unpredictable. One sister wrote, "Our failure lies not in rebellion, but in indifference. When she no longer pleads to be heard, she escapes us forever." That is your escape. So tonight, I ask you, quietly, fiercely, can you walk forward with fire in your chest, even if no one claps? Can you rise, fully sovereign, knowing they may never understand you again? Can you become the storm, without narrating the rain? Because, if the answer is yes, if the final leash breaks here, then your power is no longer borrowed, it is born. This is the aftermath. Not of collapse, but of coronation. You have broken the chains, burned the masks, cut the final leash, the hunger for their understanding. Now comes the part no one prepares you for. The quiet, the raw stillness of sovereignty. Because true freedom isn't loud. It doesn't come with a marching band. It doesn't announce itself on a feed. It just is. And in that stillness, you begin to hear something you haven't heard in years. Your own unfiltered mind. Not the voice shaped by survival. Not the edits made for acceptability. The original transmission, the signal beneath the noise, and it will feel foreign at first, because you've spent your life speaking in dialects they approved. But now, your native tongue returns. You'll wake up and not reach for your phone. You'll walk and feel the ground like it means something. You'll speak, not to impress, but to transmit. That's when you realize you're no longer part of their system. You are now a system of your own. And from here, everything changes. Your relationships become altars, not convenience, not codependency. Only resonance survives this level. Your work becomes a weapon. Every action, sharpened by awareness. No wasted movements, no sell-out missions. Your presence becomes pressure. People will feel you enter a room, not because of your volume, but because you carry nothing false. The Ashfords feared this exact phase. They called it the untethered moment, the point where a subject's internal compass becomes stronger than any external command. They wrote, "Once the subject navigates solely by inner fire, the process cannot be reversed. She becomes ungovernable. You are now ungovernable, by trend, by shame, by fear, by praise. But know this, you will feel alone, even powerful. Men feel it. It is the tax of sovereignty, but it is better to walk the path of one remembered soul than to drown in the sea of forgettable ghosts. Now, you'll return to the world, not to rejoin it, but to reshape it. You left a ghost. You return as a problem, because they don't know what to do with a man who can't be shamed, who can't be bribed, who doesn't flinch when isolated, and doesn't fold when adored. You've become something rare, something unstable in the eyes of the system, something that cannot be placed on a spreadsheet or seduced by a spotlight. You've become sovereign, and here's what happens. Next, people around you will rearrange, not because you told them to, but because your very presence now reveals their masks. Your silence will expose their insecurity. Your focus will challenge their distraction. Your boundaries will offend their dependency. Do not shrink. Do not apologize. Do not offer softness where a sword is needed. You are no longer here to fit in. You are here to disturb the order of things, because men like you, men who've reclaimed their fire, don't blend, they bend the fabric of every space they enter. That's why the Ashfords called men like this contagions of will, not because they spread disease, but because they spread defiance. One entry reads, in the presence of an awakened subject, even the obedient begin to question. Exactly. Your existence makes others remember. So now, the game flips. You don't ask to be included, they ask to survive your proximity. But here's the final twist. You lead with stillness, not dominance, not anger, not hunger. The old king needed control. The old king needed control. The new king just is. So walk into rooms like altars, not to perform, but to preside. Speak less, move sharper. Let your very gaze remind people that their excuses are lies they've repeated too long, because this world doesn't change through speeches. It changes when a single man refuses to forget what he truly is. They feared you long before you were born. Not you, the man, but you. The archetype, the pattern they knew would return. The Ashfords left records of it, hidden deep beneath theological riddles and surgical diagrams. They called it the remnant male. Not a soldier, not a follower, not even a rebel, but something older, a presence that could not be erased from human memory, only suppressed. Here's what they wrote. When the remnant rises, doctrine fails. No drug, chant, or ritual can pacify him. He infects the minds of others, not with chaos, but with unbearable truth. They discovered, painfully, that this kind of man didn't fight the system by attacking it. He fought it by making it irrelevant. Because a sovereign man doesn't dismantle institutions. He becomes unreachable by them. He builds tribes outside of permission. He creates economies without masters. He teaches without licenses. He fathers without state approval. He lives without leash. That's why they tried to cut you from the roots, through fatherlessness, through seduction, through humiliation dressed as education, through debt, through distraction. But you survived. And more than that, you remembered now. Your very existence is a crack in their fortress. You don't need to raise your voice. You don't need to protest. You don't need to post. You just need to embody. Be the man who says what others only think. Be the man who walks out when everyone else folds. Be the man who lives in alignment with something eternal. Because their power ends the moment you decide to stand up slowly and walk away. No chains, no explanation, no anger, just departure. And from that moment on, every eye in the room feels your absence like a wound. In the final Ashford records, the last page simply reads, if he returns, our age ends. And now, you have returned. This is the part they never expected you to reach. Not survival, not rebellion, but creation. Because all their systems were designed for one thing. To make sure you never built your own. They gave you war, so you'd never plant. They gave you shame, so you'd never lead. They gave you noise, so you'd never hear the sound of your own command. But now, the battlefield is empty behind you. The chains are rusted on the floor, and your hands, finally, are free. Now we build, not for applause, not for followers, not to prove them wrong, but because the real king creates. So let's begin writing the first laws of your inner empire, not just philosophies, but decrees, rules forged in fire. Here are the 5 pillars of the awakened. Time is blood. You no longer spend time. You invest it like sacred currency. Every hour must feed your legacy, your strength, or your stillness. If not, it dies. Speech is spellcraft. You do not speak to impress. You speak to manifest. Every word is chosen. like steel for a blade. You do not gossip. You do not explain. You declare brotherhood is armor. You do not walk alone out of pride, only out of discernment. You choose allies not by comfort, but by code. Lions do not train with sheep. Discipline is devotion. You do not rely on motivation. You do not wait to feel ready. Your rituals become sacred, and when it's time, you move, without hesitation, without question. Femininity is sanctuary, not salvation. A woman is not your mission, she is your mirror. She reflects what you've built, but she cannot build it for you. You protect her not because she is weak, but because you are strong. These are the beginning, not of a lifestyle, but of a lineage, because what you're building now isn't just for you, it's for the ones coming behind you, the ones who will never have to crawl through the ash because you lit the first fire. The Ashfords tried to sterilize this legacy, erase the blueprint, destroy the seed, but they failed because they didn't account for you, not a prophet, not a prisoner, but a founder. Now that the walls are raised, the question becomes, how do you make it last? Not for a season, not until convenience fades, but for generations, until the bones of your enemies rot beneath the foundations you laid. Because this is where most men fall. They rise. Briefly they taste clarity, command, direction, and then they forget. They fall back into noise, back into ease, back into the slow death of the ordinary. But not you. You didn't come this far to become temporary. You came to etch it in fire. And for that, you need ritual, not superstition, structure, embodied, memory. Let me show you how the old kings made it real. The morning watch you rise before the world touches you, before voices, before updates, before the algorithm. In that silence, you speak your first decree, not a wish, not a hope, a command. I direct my time. I command my mind. I shape this day, every morning, without fail. That's the first ritual. Because if the world owns your morning, it owns you. The gate of fire at least once a week. You walk through discomfort on purpose. You do what's hard, what's unpleasant, without reward. Why? Because comfort is the slowest poison, and the man who can sit in fire can walk through kingdoms untouched. The Ashfords feared this discipline. In one surviving entry, they wrote, "Subjects who choose suffering become impossible to reroute. They defy reward systems. They resist programming. They evolve." The naming ritual, you, right? Your name, your real name, not the one they gave you, the one that speaks to your nature, your role, your purpose, and you read it to yourself, aloud, once per week, in darkness, by candlelight, not because it's mystical, but because repetition is remembrance, and remembrance is rebirth. The ancestral table, you create a space, physical or spiritual, where you honor the men who refuse to kneel, even if you have no father, no mentor, no bloodline. You adopt legacy. You build one forward. You say, it ends with me. It begins with me. And so it is. This is how empires endure, not through war, through ritual, through men who repeat truth until it becomes blood memory. Now rise, not as the man who clicked play out of curiosity, but as the hidden king returned. You've walked the ruins. You've seen the systems behind the curtain. You've cut the leashes, broken the seals, and reclaimed the voice they buried beneath decades of programming. Now, you re-enter the world, but not quietly, not humbly, not as one seeking entry, but as one rewriting the laws. You will feel the weight of contrast. You'll walk into rooms that once held you, and feel how small they truly are. You'll speak truths that crack like thunder, not because you raise your voice, but because your tone is carved from conviction. You'll see men, strong bodies, weak spines, wince in your presence, because your existence exposes their abandonment of self. This is power, Not force, not noise, but presence that cannot be faked. And now, a word to the ones watching you. They will say you changed. They will say you've become cold, arrogant, dangerous. Let them. Because the world does not need another polished man playing roles. It needs a king who remembers. The Ashfords tried to sever memory. To cut the thread that links a man to his ancient knowing, but they failed. Because you are the proof. That memory cannot be erased, only buried, and you have become the shovel, the flame, the return. From this moment forward, your life is a signal, a frequency for other sovereigns to hear and follow, and when they find you, not on stage, not in spotlight, but in the shadows, in the work, in the stillness, they'll feel it in their bones. One of us made it out. So you lead. Not with slogans, but with structure. Not with rage, but with rituals. Not with rituals, not with presence. This is your weapon now, a life, so aligned, so embodied, so unapologetically whole, that it breaks programming just by being seen. But, before we close, one final invocation. In the comments, type these words twice, to mark the seal. I remember, I return, I return. Let it echo, let it bind, let it signal the others. This is the final descent, and the first ascent. You've walked the forbidden corridors of the Ashford legacy. You've tasted the metallic silence of their rituals. You've seen how they broke women to crush men, how they perfected obedience disguised as healing, and how their real enemy was memory, ancestral memory. Masculine memory, the kind that survives. Centuries in the marrow of a bloodline. They weren't just trying to erase the past. They were trying to prevent the return of a future. You, the archetype they feared, the anomaly. They couldn't program out the sovereign. They couldn't seduce the man who remembers in a world built on forgetting. And now, we stand at the altar of your own myth. Not myth in the sense of fantasy, but in the sense of origin. Because history is what they record, but myth is what you become. You are not just a man with ideas. You are now a living symbol, of restoration, of resistance, of return. They tried to make you a cautionary tale. You became a prophecy instead. From this point forward, your name becomes a vibration. Your walk becomes ritual. Your choices become blueprints for sons, for brothers, for men who haven't found the fire yet, but will, because you kept it alive. And the ash they've already lost. Because despite all the screams, scalpels, and soul-forging scripts, one flame escaped, one lineage cracked the code, and it wasn't royalty, it wasn't rebellion, it was remembrance. So, hear this, you are not broken, you are not behind, you are becoming. You are the remnant, and remnant men don't survive systems, they end them. So let the world call this a video. You and I both know. This was a ritual, an awakening, a return, and now, you don't need permission, you don't need closure, you only need the next step. Take it silently, deliberately, like a king who never truly left. This is your legacy now, not carved in stone, but in men. You are the myth. Walk accordingly.